Welcome to Whitespace, DCD's weekly roundup of news in the data center industry. This week we're joined by Aditya Kishore of DCD Intelligence. And Adi, you're going to talk to us about London. It's always been a big centre for data centre activity, but these days we're hearing a lot about property prices and issues with the power networks. Are we going to see a migration out of London? Has London seen its last days as the great location?
No, I think in a word, no. Our research found that despite some of the challenges that London is facing, which is typical of most major hub cities, there are high prices, there's a shortage of locations that are well suited to data centers, there are concerns about power, but overall I think the attractiveness of London as a hub for data centers is just very, very strong, and that attraction is heavily based on some of the historical macroeconomic strengths that London has as a center of global commerce, as a major financial hub city, and those kind of that sort of economic gravity pulls in a lot of major companies into the city, and then that in itself helps drive data center investment. Also, I think the fact that it is a hub city is another major draw for new investment, because companies are looking for sort of dense data center clusters with a lot of the benefits of interconnectivity, telecom networks, things like that.
Okay.
What about skills though? Because skills is another problem. We're constantly hearing how there's not enough people to stuff the UK's data centers. So, did you look at that? What are we going to do about it?
It's a good question. Certainly skills and skills shortages are a concern across the board for the industry. I think everyone involved is a little bit concerned about getting the workforce that's required. DCDI actually did a fairly comprehensive analysis of the skills shortage at a global level, and there's a report we published late last year on the topic. Interestingly enough, London was one of the areas that was the least concerned. So again, it's a relative balance, not an absolute one. There's a lot of concern, but London is actually less concerned, and in fact, that was one of the issues that we talked about in some of our primary research when we were talking to executives with data center properties in London. And there was a relatively high level of confidence in their ability to either find skilled labor or upskill labor relatively quickly. So you've got a set of basic skills that you can then, relatively light amount of training can get them up to speed, or draw it from other parts of the world. Again, because of that overall sort of economic draw that London has. And so it was like, we can find people who have technical skills.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. It's sort of like, everybody wants a nice salary.
Yes. And the thing I like about the Hub series generally in this report is the way in which you look at the other issues around, including sort of power, probably transport comes in as well. I imagine if sort of what happens with London's airports probably makes a bit of a difference. What happens with transport in the city probably makes a bit of a difference to the attractiveness. Just that the real world does impinge on data centers.
Very much so, and I think to your point, probably a little more so in major central hub cities, because these are challenges across industry for big urban centers. London is actually particularly interesting, given that you mentioned transport, because historically a lot of data center investment has been very centralized in London. We've had a lot of investment in Shoreditch, in the City of London, in the Docklands, but what we're seeing is kind of a shift actually in investment more towards kind of in or outside the M25, so just around that area. And obviously Slough is a huge data center hub within the UK, but we're also seeing a lot more investment kind of just drift a little further out of the city, kind of around the M25. And again, the reason is the fact that you're benefiting from some of the clean air, more space, cheaper costs, all of that. But also transport links are actually quite good. So for example, Slough Council is lobbying intensely for a new rail link to Slough from Heathrow, which would get the time from Heathrow to Slough down to 6 minutes, which is, gives them a very powerful argument then to develop it further as a data center. One of the reasons for data center investment being very, very centralized was latency. There was a concern, particularly for financial trading. And again, what we're seeing is that fiber connectivity, as well as kind of more of an awareness amongst end users that perhaps latency isn't that critical for every application. So that again is sort of helping kind of maybe help develop the industry a little further out of the center.
Yeah.
Yes. Meanwhile, speaking about places that are located out of London but are still pretty important, I visited Campbell this week.
Right, which is where?
Oh,
It's
kind of...
near Cheltenham, or?
Yeah, kind of northwest, yeah.
Yes. Have you been this far from London before?
Not to that side, but I haven't been to that side of the UK, so yeah, you exit the station and there's one sort of like very old school pub and rolling hills and countryside, and the taxi had to come pick us up from out of town, and why
were you seeing?
Exactly, what makes Campbell interesting is ProLabs. ProLabs is a fairly small UK company. They also work in the US market. What they do though is very interesting. Have you ever heard about compatibles?
No. Is it a dating site?
It's sort of like it could be described as dating for networking equipment. So basically you have a Juniper switch and a Cisco switch, and if you just use cables provided by Juniper or Cisco, those will never talk between each other, because every wire that interconnects them, we're talking fiber optics now, it has a little chip with a codec, and this codec is sort of like a code, like a passphrase, and unless you know the passphrase, you can't actually connect your equipment together. This is where ProLabs comes in. ProLabs isn't by no means the only company doing this, but they're one of the biggest in Europe.
Yes.
And they make cables that let a bunch of the equipment talk to each other. And it's very interesting, because it's like a zoo of different kinds of... I've never seen so many different switches in one place, because people, exactly for that reason, they usually, stick to Cisco, they stick to Juniper or Zixel. For example... Question, you're a telecoms operator, you have loads of Nortel equipment, which is good for another 10 years, but you can't really pair it with any of your other equipment, so what do you do?
Nortel doesn't exist.
Exactly. You go to these guys, and they also have a lab there, they do testing, giant warehouse, and the lead time of just 1 day versus apparently 3 weeks for some vendors. So if you need a cable from... apparently you will have to wait 3 weeks to get it.
So, a little further up the stack, Max, you've been looking at why Akamai wants to make changes to TCP/IP. They can't do that, surely.
Yeah, and a lot of people have questioned it, but nothing stops them from deploying their own system. Anyway, so this week, Akamai, the content delivery network, has been to a Facebook conference with a new internet protocol. It's called Giga, it's meant as a replacement to TCP/IP, and apparently, on average, improves internet speeds by 30%. But interestingly, apparently the increase depends on the quality of the network. So they could do wonderful things in China and India, but when they went to Germany and Deutsche Telekom, they couldn't improve anything.
Because if the network's good, there's not a lot they can add.
Yes, exactly. So I'm just wondering, whether this is even realistic. We're sort of like we try to figure out like how quickly you can push through these changes. You guys, any comments?
Well, Adi, why would a content delivery network need to improve on TCP?
So I think that the challenge is actually not so much technical. It starts off with people in their homes, and it's to do with tablets and smartphones. Today, the majority of content on the net from a bandwidth perspective is video, and that's because video takes up a lot of capacity. It takes a lot of space, and so obviously that has huge implications from a data center standpoint in terms of storage, in terms of processing. But from a telecom network operator standpoint, it's a much bigger problem, because you really do have a limited pipe. It's a shared pipe across a lot of users. And if you've got a household that's just cranking out that internet video, you've got a problem. I think one of the ways in which Akamai is trying to do that is to look for ways to adapt TCP/IP, because certainly they felt that it's not at all well suited to multicast, or they don't see a way that they can do that.
It was developed like 30 years ago or so, and for an entirely different purpose.
For an entirely different internet with completely different applications.
Yes.
So that's very true, and I think you're going to have to sort of almost re-engineer the entire internet to cope with the spikes in video capacity.
Exactly. So how realistic is it that Akamai proposes something and we're actually gonna get it?
Well, obviously Akamai is a huge transporter of internet content. It delivers a huge percentage of
they claim sort of like 25% of all traffic.
It's pretty substantial. So I think obviously that in itself is fairly influential. But I think you're also seeing some shifts in the overall content delivery framework of the world, with two companies in particular, Google and Netflix, who are responsible for a huge amount of video distribution. So Netflix is about 40% of peak downstream traffic in the US. So it has a huge impact. So I think those two companies are probably about as influential. And I think, if there's some sort of agreement between 3-4 of these huge heavyweights, then I think we can see change.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, I would question that Akamai can sort of change something quite as big as this. My guess is they'll evangelize it, try to look for partners, try to get more people to sign up, and then if they can engineer that, change them.
I mean, unless anybody watching this knows different, we've looked for signs of Giga inside the normal IETF standards process. We haven't found an RFC for it and that sort of thing. So the normal internet standards process seems to be being bypassed here, or maybe it will go into it at some point and we can wait for the normal internet standard timescale before this happens. I don't know. Thank you, Addy. And now we're joined by Bill Boyle. Hello.
Hello chaps, how are you doing?
Fine. The highlight of your week has been some Russian cooling, is that right?
And Klima Veneta is a company, and they've done something really quite interesting over a really vast space of 7 hectares. Now, I haven't actually done the calculation of what that means in terms of acres, but it's very, very big. They've actually got a floor space of 323,000 square feet, so that's rather large, and that's a number of data centers. But the most interesting one is the main one, which has got an outside cooling system. Now, it looks fantastic, and if you look on the website, you'll see this vast internal cooling system which brings the air in from outside. So the air blows in from the outside, the facade, the actual facade of the building, which in itself is really impressive. It looks fantastic. And then it comes in through a special free cooling system. Wind blows in through the outside into mixing chambers. The mixing chambers look quite spectacular. Cold air reaches the main duct, which cools the internal circuits, and then flows through into the data center. Very impressive.
It looks like something of an 80s James Bond film, right?
It does. I don't know if you can see it from here, but you can see it on the website better. It does look like there's little Bond villains running about inside.
Exactly, and
a man stroking a cat in the middle.
So this week there was some interesting news from Open Compute. The Open Compute project makes and publishes specifications for commodity hardware for big data centers. Okay, but it's just got a bunch of new members from a sector where it's not had much coverage before, the telco sector. So AT&T, Verizon, Deutsche Telekom, SK Telecom from Singapore, and EE from the UK. They've all joined Open Compute, and Open Compute has set up a telco project to work on their specifications.
Wait, Verizon is selling its data centers, so what is it doing there?
That's
good question.
A very good question. The thing is, Verizon and AT&T, and probably some of the others, are getting out of retail colo. They're not running colocation spaces to sell services to other people. They're still selling those services, but there are other people in the space who can run them more efficiently for them. So they're getting out of retail, but they still have a lot of needs for their own spaces. companies like BT and Verizon run central offices. They have telephone exchanges, as you would call them, which is like the old-fashioned word for the edge network. AT&T has set up an open source project which is about turning the central office, so-called, into a data center. The way that's been done so far has been like making specialized equipment, the way the telcos have always done it in the past. And what they've realized now is that they could do it cheaper and better if they used commodity hardware, and the network intelligence is as an app on top of that.
So software defined comes as standard, basically.
Yeah, and for the big players in the edge network to start using commodity hardware and flexible software to a much greater extent than they have so far. I'm expecting this one to be quite interesting, and I look forward to it. Yeah. And Max, tell us with your brush with the world of fine art and documentary making.
I've missed this. I haven't written a film review since university days, but this week we've discovered that a team of artists from the UK is making a documentary about data centers.
Excellent.
But it's sort of like, it's trying to marry the practical side of it to sort of like, explain data centers to civilians. You guys are all using cloud services, this is what it actually is. But it's sort of like the other aspect of it I find a lot more interesting. So the director of the film, his surname is Matt Parker, not Peter Parker. He's actually sort of like a sound artist, and he had a couple of installations around the UK doing very, very interesting work with sound.
Yeah.
And basically one of his major annoyances is when you see a data center in TV or film, it's silent. And obviously never happens, ever. If a data center is silent, then it's broken. And his thing is he's recording various types of computer hardware, how it sounds, and the entire soundtrack is going to be composed out of those sounds. And that, judging by his previous work, which you can, there are links on the site, you can check it out.
Yes.
Should be very, very interesting. So it's not just what data centers are and how they work, but also the aesthetics, what it feels like to be inside a data center. Because, I mean, these are modern cathedrals,
Yes. And he doesn't just record the sound, albeit with very, very good microphones. He works with it and makes something interesting from it.
Yes. So the film, it's called The People's Cloud. It's coming in this summer. I mean, it's going to do the festival circuit first, and then hopefully going to get a distribution deal. But whatever happens, is going to be very, very interesting to see the final product.
And hear it.
It would be interesting to ask some data center engineers whether they can tell the difference between a digital realty establishment or an Equinix establishment.
Yes. Actually, funny you should say that. Equinix is one of the Michael Winterson, our good friend Michael, is part of the film. He's been interviewed there, as well as some people from Verne Global, from the Subsea Cables UK. So they've, even though they're not from the industry, but they've managed to assemble a quite good crew of specialists to talk about this.
So, thank you for joining us. See you in the next white space.